noticed when you kind of came in this morning on that kind of welcome table where you get your bulletin, there's also a little stack of sermon notes. Now, because our sermon notes now will get to live in the app, so if you're a smartphone user, you can use our new app now to take sermon notes there, and you can, they're interactive, you can fill in the blanks, you can type things out, you can save them, you can email them to yourself, so they're really cool. But for those of you who are not smartphone users, that's where you'll find sermon notes now. So I'll make those each week, and you'll be able to pick those up at the table. So you'll be able to find those there. And if you're a smartphone user, use your smartphone, because we're not going to print all that many of them. All right, so save those for those who aren't as big on the smartphone. All right, public service announcement over. All right. So my guess is, in your life, you have a throne, and someone or something sits on this throne. I'm not sure what it is, but something sits here. Now, as we've been going through the book of Hebrews in this series, talking about worship and why we do the things that we do on Sunday mornings, kind of the core problem or the core message in Hebrews is we have an audience that has something else on this throne other than God. And because of that, it's leading to all kinds of problems. It's leading to them being discouraged. It's leading to them not growing like they should. It's leading to them giving up meeting together because of fear of persecution. It's just leading them to all these problems because of who or what they've decided to put here. And so as we've been talking about all these parts of our services, it kind of comes back to the bigger picture, which is this throne. And you all have this throne because all of us have certain priorities and decisions that we make. And those priorities and those decisions are made because of who or what sits right here. Now, maybe you have a particular something that sits here, or maybe you have a host of characters that all take turns up here on this throne. Perhaps, maybe your job sits here. Now, I know that, when we have jobs, we agree to certain kinds of responsibilities, and we have people we have to listen to and people who sometimes we have to lead and guide, and we have certain, amounts of hours we agree to work and a schedule we agree that we're going to keep. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, this is the guy who maybe, they agree to a 40-hour-a-week job, and then before they know it, they're working 70-plus hours every week. I mean, they didn't mean for it to get that bad. They didn't mean for that to happen. It started out fine enough, but at some point, they came home late for work. Just that kind of became the routine, and they missed tucking in the kids at bedtime, or they started to miss basketball games and football and cheerleading and dance and concerts and all kinds of things. And they didn't mean to. It's just that, it felt really good that first time when their boss told them, hey, you did a really great job this week. They had a high-performing quarter. It just felt good. And then came the raise and the promotion and the accolades, and they realized, that feels really good. It feels good to be needed. It feels good to be told how good you are at something, so maybe I need to put in 50 hours and 60 hours. And the more time you put in, the more you were congratulated, the more you were rewarded, the more you were told how important you are to the company and how needed you are, and it just felt good. So you just kept going, and before you knew it, all your priorities and all of your decisions and everything got made by your job. And so maybe your job sits up here. Maybe it's not your job. Maybe it's how people see you. Maybe it's like your image. And you just hate to ever have an embarrassing moment or to have a slip up or to say something you didn't mean to say or to wear the wrong outfit, and maybe you're just constantly checking social media trying to see, did I get any more likes? Do I have any more followers? Why did they not tag me in that post? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And you're just really worried about how people see you and perceive you. You didn't mean for that to happen, right? I mean, you were a little conscious about, hey, I don't want to look like a fool, don't want to be dumb, don't want to, but eventually it just became a problem and just kind of eats you up inside. What do they talk? Are they talking about me back there? What are they saying? Why didn't I get recognized and she did or he did? What's going on? Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's your emotions. Maybe your life is a little bit like that Pixar movie Inside Out, where whichever emotion gets here first just takes charge. And so if you're not happy, well, I better make sure I'm happy. So I'm going to change everything. I'm going to do whatever it takes to be happy. Or maybe your anger hops up here and you're just going to bulldoze people out of the way to get what you want because you're angry and you deserve something and you're going to go after it. Not sure what it is for you. And again, you might have a whole group of characters that maybe they just kind of take turns up here. And the problem is, somewhere along the way, we learned that whoever sits here helps us out, at least a little bit. Because you learn that, well, when I put my job up here, good things happen. People congratulate me, I get promotions, I get recognized at work, I make more money, so our families, we can do more things, and so that it's good, right? Or you learn that, well, when I really care about what people think of me, and I try to really careful about managing my image and everything, people seem to respect me more. People think I'm really good. Maybe they think I'm better than I really am, and you just kind of kept feeding it. You learn that whoever and whatever sits here, it helps you out. It's like, sure, I'll leave you there. You can stay there because it's helping me out. It's working. Now, I'm sure for a lot of us, we would say, well, nice try, Justin, trying to pull one over on us. We're in church. Obviously, God sits on our throne. Like, you're not going to, nothing else sits up here. It's clearly God. I'm here in church. Obviously, God sits on this throne. But are you so sure of that? Just because you do all the right things doesn't necessarily mean he gets this seat in your life. There just might be something else. So who sits on your throne? And if it isn't God, then how do you get God back on that throne? What do you do? Because we've been talking about, worship, and we've talked about why we gather in the first place. We've talked about why we have music. We've talked about why we listen to a sermon. We've talked about communion last week. We've talked about all these different traditions and things that we do every single week. And there's a bigger picture to all of it. There's a bigger context going on with all of it. Because the bottom line is, when we come into God's presence, he's going to change us. He's going to transform us. He's going to do something. It may happen quickly. It may take a really long time. It may switch gears, sometimes go fast, sometimes go slow. But God does something to each of us. But when you take God off his throne and put something else up there, that thing, whatever sits here, will change who you are. It will get to shape you. So how do you put God up here? What do we do about that? Well, I want to read you a quote that Pastor Paul David Tripp wrote. He said, "If you're not living in awe of God, you are left with no higher agenda than to live for yourself. It really does get reduced to your wants, your needs, and your feelings. You really do become obsessed with your own happiness. You really will see other people as standing in your way." Could that be more true for us than we'd like to admit? That at the end of the day, it's really not God that's up here as much as we'd like him to be. It's other things. And so we see other people as, well, you're in my way. Like, your wants and your needs and what you're doing in your life is getting between me and what I want. My happiness, my reputation, my performance at work, my family, whatever it is. You're saying, well, you're getting between me and what I want. And we start to bulldoze people and ignore people, and it really all becomes about me. And we just totally lose the forest for the trees. Because, see, it's actually really easy for bad motives to slip onto this throne. We don't mean them to, but it just kind of happens. It just slowly gets into our lives and ends up here. And so the problem that the people in the book of Hebrews is having is something's happened with their throne. And so they begin to give up, they begin to change what they care about and how they think and how they operate, and they're not really afraid of God anymore. They're more afraid of what other people will do to them. They're worried about persecution, they're worried about their money, they're worried about themselves, and their church is just starting to fall apart. And so the author of Hebrews is trying to remind them there's a bigger picture to worship, and there's a bigger picture to this throne, and there's a change that happens when you get God back on the throne. So how do we do that? Well, Hebrews chapter 13 actually helps us out a lot with that. So if you remember, several weeks ago, we were talking about why we worship, and we're talking about music and praise in particular. And we were in Hebrews chapter 12, which describes these two different mountains. And the only difference, if you remember, between the two mountains is Jesus. One mountain, there's fear, there's distance from God, there's trembling, there's darkness, there's thunder. And in the other mountain, there's thankfulness, there's awe, there's this gathering of people. And the difference is Jesus has built the bridge. He's become the great high priest. So if you want to turn in your Bible or on your device to Hebrews chapter 13, that's where we're going to be this morning. Because Hebrews chapter 12, just to kind of remind you, here's how chapter 12 ends. He writes, "Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire." So he ends chapter 12 with this whole idea of how we're worshiping. If we're going to worship God in a good way, it's thankfulness, it's fear, it's awe. That's what it takes. And then he turns the corner to chapter 13 and gives us stuff to do, which a lot of people say, well, that seems like a weird ending. There's actually people that would argue chapter 13 was just kind of tacked on to the end of Hebrews, but actually it makes a lot of sense. Because here's what he says, going on in chapter 13, verse 1, "Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. Continue to remember those in prison as if you were together with them in prison, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." So these first few verses, he just starts off with here's how you love other people. And he talks about this idea of hospitality. And actually, that second verse there about some have shown hospitality to angels and they haven't even known it, there's actually several stories of that in your Old Testament. The most popular is probably Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham and Sarah, 3 visitors, just randomly show up one day, and so they bring them in, they make dinner for them, they let them sit and rest at their home, and as the conversation goes on, these angels, they inform Abraham that he's going to have a son. And they've never had kids, and they're like in their 90s, and so they're thinking, yeah, right, that's not going to happen, or that can't be done. And Abraham laughs with joy because he can't believe God's going to do this. Sarah overhears this back in the tent, and she laughs out of disbelief. She's more laughing like, yeah, right, God. Abraham's laughing because he's like, that's incredible. And so the angels, they tell Abraham, so you're going to have this son, and you're going to name him Isaac, which means ha ha ha. You're going to name your son ha 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 because you laugh with joy, but your wife's in the tent right now laughing in disbelief, and you don't laugh at God like that. And that's how the story goes. But there's actually a few other places where this happens. Gideon in the book of Judges and Manoah also entertain angels, and they don't know it. Lot does this as well in the book of Genesis. And every time this happens, they're given some kind of a message, some kind of a word from God. And so the point that the author of Hebrews is kind of making is when you show hospitality, something bigger can happen that you don't even know about. And in the ancient world, hospitality was no joke. Like, if you didn't show hospitality, you were an outcast, you were a jerk, you were thrown out. Because, back in the day, there weren't hotel chains and 24-hour, drive-thrus and restaurants. So when somebody new showed up to town, the way for them to get food and a place to stay was to go by everybody's house and be like, hey, can I stay with you tonight? Can we stay with you? Can we stay with you? Like, that's how you did it. And how'd you get a hot meal? Somebody had to cook you a dinner. And it was just expected that if somebody shows up at your house, you invite them in, you take care of them. That's what you do. And if you don't have enough food on hand, you can go to your neighbors and get help from them. And everyone's supposed to chip in and help out. That's what you do. Now, for most of us, we don't really necessarily think that way all the time, right? Like if some random person just showed up to your house for Thanksgiving and said, hey, I'm here for Thanksgiving, and you're like, who are you? No one invited you? You'd probably be able to like, can you please leave? Like, you'd probably find the most polite way to like push them out the door. But in that culture, like, no, come on in. Even though nobody invited you, we've never seen you before, you just dropped in, come on in. Great, we're glad you're here. So we can have a different little bit of an attitude when it comes to hospitality a lot of times. But here's the thing about hospitality for us today is I think hospitality is a great way to do evangelism. Because somebody, they may not want to, come to church. They may not feel up to that or come to a Bible study or something. But they probably won't turn down a free meal in your home. They're like, hey, why don't you come over for dinner? Like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to come over and eat food, watch a movie, have a game night, whatever. Sounds great. And you never know when a few invitations into your house might turn into an invitation to this house. It's a great way just to get around the table with people. Because, see, when God gets on this throne, you don't see people as being in your way. You see them as being part of what you're supposed to do, part of your way. You look at them and say, hey, God invited us around his table. I can invite you around my table too. You can be a part of this. It may feel a little weird, may feel a little awkward, but it's good to show hospitality to others. Now he keeps going on in verse 4. He says, marriage should be honored by all, and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and all the sexually immoral. Now this is where that reverent fear comes in, because he says if you mess up marriage, God's coming after you. You better be afraid of God, because he's going to deal with it. Because here's what can happen, is sometimes what gets put on this throne can be marriage, or it can even be like romance. And maybe let me take you back in time a little bit for those of you who are married. You know, when you first started dating your spouse, it was like, it was wonderful, it was magical, it was fireworks and rainbows, and it was beautiful, it was awesome, it was so much fun. And we got married, and it was wonderful. And then I don't know when it happened, but at some point you just went, this is really normal. And my husband isn't Clark Kent, and he's never turned into Superman. Or you're like, what happened to my wife? Like, we used to do all these fun, exciting things, and now she wants to like make sure the house gets clean and take care of the kids, and what's going on? And it's like, this is so normal. Is this what this is like now? And maybe in your head you start to think, I think I just deserve better. I deserve someone who's going to listen to me. I deserve someone who's way more fun. I deserve someone who's more exciting. Where did all those feelings go from when we were dating and when we first got married? What happened to that spark? And so you think, I married the wrong person. That must be what it is. So I'm going to go find somebody else. And here's what every counselor who works with anybody that's ever had an affair will tell you, is you'll find that spark if you go find somebody else for a little while. Because it's just like when you started your relationship with your spouse. At the beginning, yeah, it was fun, it was exciting, it was great, it was wonderful. And then at some point you realized, oh, they're not perfect. And they make mistakes like I do, and we get mad at each other, and we have fights, and we have responsibilities we got to take care of. And for a little while, the new person is also fun and mysterious, and it's exciting, and oh, what's going to happen next? And then you realize they're not perfect either. And maybe you'll remember, you're not perfect either. Both of you aren't perfect. And you end up in the exact same spot. And the author of Hebrews says, you better protect your marriage. Not because it's on this throne, but because of the one who is on this throne. And he loves your marriage, and he wants the best for it. And that's not just for marriage, but you could also think about that just as relationships and friendships. Just working hard to make sure that your friendship doesn't get on here, but because of God being here, you say, I'm going to watch out for you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to do what I can to look after you. Because if not, God will deal with you. And that's where this fear comes in. And then he goes on, verse 5. He says this, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So we say with confidence, the Lord is my helper, I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? So I don't want you to miss this. He doesn't say in verse 5, keep your lives free from money. He says, keep your lives free from the love of money. And this is probably one of the verses in the Bible that I've heard misquoted the most. Not this one, but one that Jesus said. A lot of times I'll hear people say, well, Jesus said money is the root of all evil. No, he never said that. He never said money is the root of all evil. He said the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. If I were to, reach into my wallet and pull out like a dollar bill and sit it on the communion table right now, and we were just to all kind of stand back and observe it for a little while, you know what we would see? We would see a dollar bill sitting on the communion table. It's not going to do anything. It's not like if I put a dollar bill there, it's just going to kind of stand up and start yelling insults. It's not going to be like, hey, you idiot in the back, wake. It's not going to do that. It's not going to get all of your cash out of your wallets and purses and gather together and form a little mob and go across the street and rob the bank. It's not going to do that. It's just going to sit there. until somebody does something with it. Money is just money. It's a thing. It's not evil. Loving money too much, now that's an evil. And that will lead to other problems. And sometimes money gets up here too. And I know that a lot of times money can be stressful. It can cause a lot of anxiety. It's like, man, how are we going to pay all the bills and meet all of our needs and do this and do that? And it can be pretty stressful. And if that's you, man, money's tough. Money's just hard. Maybe you just need to memorize Hebrews 13, 5, and 6 and have this little mantra that you say. Where when you start to feel like you love your money a little too much, or you're a little worried about, man, how's this going to work? How are the bills going to work? How's this going to come together? You just say to yourself, well, God has said, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. And maybe you just have to, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. You just have to remind yourself, God has said that. And then you need to reply with confidence the next part. And so then you can say back, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? Now you might need to freshen the language up a little bit. Instead, be like, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. Bring it on. Or maybe it's, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. You can't touch me. What are you going to do? Because the author goes back to the thankfulness is, well, God takes care of us. So stop putting your money up here. Your money's not going to take care of you. Because the truth is, when money gets up on this throne, we start to think and talk and act like, it's my money. I remember this commercial years ago where people would they'd yell out of a window, it's my money and I need it now. I don't know what it was for, some legal guy or something. But when money gets up here, that's how you talk. It's my money. I deserve it. I earned it. I work hard for it. I should get to do with it what I want. It's not your money. It's God's money. And he trusts you with some of it. And if God is on the throne instead of your money, you go, how can I steward what God has given me well? How can I take care of the things he's trusted me with? Because it's his. And just like that parable Jesus told, someday you're going to stand before God and he's going to say, hey, so here's a record of all the things I gave you. How did you take care of that? It's like, I buried it in the ground and did nothing with it. Oh, that didn't work out for that servant. So for a lot of us, we've got to take maybe money off the throne and put God up here and say, God, how do you want me to use what you've trusted me with? We've got to flip it. Because all these instructions in Hebrew 13, and it goes on and adds some others, but the point of these is because there's a bigger picture to worship. And what we're talking about this morning is what happens when we're sent out, because the reality is we come in here, and it's not just about coming in here for about an hour or so and doing certain things and certain traditions, and then, okay, we leave, head to the restaurant, or you go change into comfy clothes and watch NFL the rest of the day. It's so much more than that. Because the reality is, when we come into God's presence, he's doing something. He's transforming us. He's changing us. He's shaping us. And there's a bigger picture. If God is on this throne, our bigger picture radically changes. Because anything else you put up here, you have to work really, really, really hard to keep it happy. And it will tell you who you are. And you have to work really hard to keep that identity. If your job sits up here, you just have to work harder and harder and harder and harder. Because you may put in 40 hours, and then 50 hours, and then 60, and then 70, and 80, and however many it takes to feel good, to feel like, no, that's my identity, so I've got to work hard and put in a lot to it. And then what do you do when suddenly this young new guy swoops into your business, and suddenly they're way better than you, and they're performing better than you on less time, and you're just like, what? Wait, what? I was the expert. What happened? This young kid from college comes in with all these new tricks and all these new ideas, and what's going on? Or you retire and you go, well, now I don't have that title anymore. And all I knew was this title that I had at my job. Now who am I? What do I do? Well, whatever you put up here, you have to keep it happy. You have to work really, really hard to earn it over and over again. But when God gets to be on your throne, you don't earn your identity. You're given your identity. You don't have to work for it. You don't have to earn it. It's not about, well, God will love me if I go to church on Sunday morning and Bible study and do a Sunday evening small group and come to Wednesday, and then we need to add a Thursday program and a Saturday program, and I need to serve 10 hours a week, and then God will love me. That's not how that works. It's not that, well, I've got to serve more than the person next to me, otherwise God's not going to love me. No. God loves you because you're his. Doesn't matter how hard you work, how much you work, he's still going to love you. Doesn't mean you're lazy, but it just means you don't have to earn it. You don't have to fight for it all the time. And when we're sent out, the bigger picture is, because of what God is doing in here, we're able to take this good news out to others. Because the reality is there's a whole lot of people in this world that they think they've got to earn this. They've got to fight for it. They think they've got to find all these other ways to know who they are and define who they are. And they either don't care or they just don't know that there's a God in heaven who actually has an identity for them. And all they have to do is accept it. It changes everything. And so because of what happens in here, that changes who we are out there. It changes the kind of people that we are. Because we're the kind of people who lives with God on our throne. Not a job, not our families, not our marriages, not money, not whatever else it is. We say, no, God, you're in charge. So how do you want me to live? How can I do this? So, here's what we can do. If you think, well, it's possible that maybe God's not actually here. Maybe something else is. But I'm going to challenge you to pick one of the instructions in Hebrews chapter 13 and do it. And it's probably, my guess is, it could feel very uncomfortable and difficult. Like, for example, this is take the hospitality one. If you decide, okay, I'm going to invite somebody over to my house for dinner. Some of you, that may be really hard and terrifying and awkward. And you think, my house is a mess. My kids are going to be running around screaming the whole time. This is going to be a disaster. I don't even know if I'm that great of a cook. It's going to be weird. But you say, okay, God, you're on the throne, and you invited me to your table. Who can I invite to my table? It changes things. Or if you decide, okay, you know what, there's some people that, you know what, I disagree with them, or I kind of don't like what they stand for, but I've been just sort of like angry at them and hateful at them. You know what, instead, I'm going to try to love them like Jesus would. Instead of just attacking, I'm going to try to put myself in their shoes and try to understand what they're going through and see, how could I help? How could I help them know that there's this God in heaven who loves them? Because the fact is, there's a whole lot of people that they're not on their way to get closer to this throne. They're heading the opposite direction. They're on their way to hell. And some of them, they just need to know that, hey, you don't have to work so hard for your identity anymore. You've been given one. You just got to accept it. And they need to see that in us. Like, well, why are you different? Well, it's because I learned that I don't have to work for it anymore. Because it changes everything. Because the bigger picture of worship isn't just Sunday. It's every day. And it's what happens in here. If nothing else, at the very least, it recalibrates us for Monday through Saturday. If nothing else, Sunday is a chance for us to kind of get everything back right again. To say, okay, I'm going to go back out there, and I'm going to love my neighbor, and I'm going to love my God with everything I've got. Let's pray. Jesus, I thank you so much for what you did on the cross, and that you rose from the dead, and that you are seated at the right hand of your Father in heaven. And God, I pray that you would help us to live our lives more and more and more as if you really are the one on the throne. And forgive us for the times when we don't do it as good of a job of that. Forgive us for the times where we've let something else take over. And Holy Spirit, help us to listen to your voice, to know what you're calling us to help us be the kind of church that shows hospitality, that stands with those who are suffering, that visits the sick, the hurting, those in prison, that stands with widows and orphans, that trusts God over our money. Help us to be that kind of people to show your love and your good news to the world. In your name I pray. Amen.